Hello to all of you who are kind enough to follow this kickoff meeting of the French presidency of the European Union in the Netherlands, whether you be on Zoom or on YouTube or on Facebook. So I would like to start by thanking our panelists who are joining us today for this session: Luuk van Middelaar, Caroline de Gruyter, and you will allow me to say a few kind words to Pierre Vimont, who was my ambassador in the United States. I belong to one of these generations of diplomats that was trained under his kind authority. So therefore, I have the pleasure of seeing him again today. Thank you very much also to Alexandra de Hoop Scheffer, who has accepted to moderate the discussion. And I also like to greet the ambassadors of the European Union in the Netherlands who are among us today and who are going to participate in this discussion. I am not going to remind you of the three levels of the French presidency of the European Union, that is to say, power, revitalization, and belonging. What I propose to do is to explore the link between two of these elements, power and belonging. And the question of sovereignty, well, basically, it is the ability to act in an autonomous way. We see that we're coming back to subjects that are dear to French strategic autonomy to advance towards an objective that we have set in an independent manner by using the resources that are ours. So there's the question of sovereignty. There's also a notion of control, not control in the sense of surveillance, but control in the sense of mastery of one's destiny. So the question of sovereignty only has meaning if there's a common objective between those who share it. And this common objective is the one that is created in a community of destinies. And I would like to get back to the terms that Luuk likes us to use in his latest book. So this refers me, of course, to the question of the link between the community, the political community that the European Union is made up of, the question of European identity as well. And this topic of belonging rests on a question of feeling. It's almost a sentimental aspect. We feel that beyond our diverse identities, there is a European common identity. And we can speak about European identity, we can speak about European culture, we can speak about European history in its tragedies and in its more glorious moments. So there is a question, which is to know if deep down if it is identity that is the foundation of this political community, that is the condition of common exercise of our sovereignty, or in the European context, or if we're living a specific experience in which sovereignty, because it makes us share common political moments, in particular the crisis that Luuk and Caroline have spoken about in their books, set a common experience that is going to create an identity. Is it therefore this sovereignty exercise together in the face of this challenge that creates in this European experience this common identity? And therefore we could have called our conference not does sovereignty precede identity, but does identity precede sovereignty in Europe, since both elements are basically two sides of the same coin. I'd like once again to thank you for having joined us, and to say that this event, this important event for us, is being held remotely because of the circumstances. It is the first of 20 events that we will organize throughout the year, and I hope that you will find this discussion interesting. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you, Luis, dear Luis. It is a true pleasure for me to participate in this opening conference of the French presidency of the European Union, especially since as a Franco-Dutch national, having spent a great part of my childhood and teenage years in The Hague, I know that you're very numerous to join us today on both sides of the Atlantic, and therefore I thank you for the interest that you have for the topics that we're going to be discussing today. The event is going to be organized in three levels. We're going to speak, as the Mr. Ambassador spoke, we're going to speak about identity, European values, which feeling of belonging to Europe exists, and then which society, which post-COVID European society we can envisage, and finally, Europe as a power in the world. Indeed, the multiple crises over the past years, whether it be the Euro crisis, whether it be the threats on the eastern side of the European continent, the migratory crisis, Brexit, the election of Donald Trump, have pushed the European Union to question itself on its identity and its political identity. And the debate, as you can see, it involves all members of the European Union, including and all political forces in France as well. And this bottom-up process in the end has led the European Union each time to take decisions, to develop new tools under the pressure of these crises. And Luuk van Middelaar has shown this in his book, which shows this European improvisation each time. So this debate between values and identity interests is fundamental to the different topics that we're going to be speaking about tonight. The European Union is based on what we could call a community of values, which allows us to create a community of interests. And we see that both of these pillars are intertwined. That is to say that one weakens, the other weakens at the same time. And even this leads to a crisis in confidence. The migratory crisis, for example, has also made us question our identity. The conflict on European Union is based as the European Union as a club of democracy. So I will answer the questions raised by Luis to say that I will speak about the question of identity first, and then we will discuss it, and then we will speak about the issue of sovereignty, because if we're not clear about what we are, about the values that we defend, that we carry, then therefore it seems difficult to me to defend them and to protect them, in particular in an international context, which can lead to destabilization of this identity, of these values that we defend. And we're going to also speak about this strategic environment, this international environment, which in my eyes accelerates and it requires the geopolitization of the European Union with the COVID crisis. So we have also seen this in the context of the Europe-China investment agreement, the question of human rights that has also taken a part in this relationship. And our relationship with China forces us to raise geoeconomic questions and geopolitical questions. And this also requires a certain change, a certain renewal of the European way of thinking. Transatlantic relationship, on which I'm working on a daily basis, is also being shaken up because what happens with what's happening inside the United States, polarization, the decline of democratic values. The United States are also experiencing an identity crisis that's unprecedented. And Donald Trump was only the symptom of this, the personification of this crisis. So this context creates a risk for the European Union, but also a space so that the European Union can play a role, a more proactive role in international relations and also in the 21st century, whether it be climate, digital questions, or also health issues. And finally, and I hope that we will bring this up, I'm sure, but given the guests that we have tonight, but there exists a desire among the European citizens to see the European Union become more sovereign in the fields that concern it on a day-to-day basis. Health, of course, but also climate, we see it more and more, and also the notion of strategic sovereignty is more and more pressing in the political debate, but also in the public debate. The desire to see Europe increase its autonomy, to be able to act on questions that concern us on a day-to-day basis as European citizens. And the polls show on a regular basis that many citizens in Europe wish to have a powerful Europe, a Europe that masters its exterior borders, a Europe that promotes more resilient supply chains and that can act in a decisive way on climate change. So the French presidency, in a certain way, should also be a moment of learning. That is to say, to explain why the European Union today and tomorrow is an efficient framework of action to face the challenges of the 21st century. And in order to discuss the different issues, we have the luck today to be surrounded by three guests who are going to shed light on these different issues. Caroline de Gruyter, who is a journalist and a correspondent for European affairs at the NRC, and also the author of the book The Habsburg Empire in the EU, which came out in March 2021. Luuk van Middelaar, who is a philosopher, a political philosopher, a historian, and a professor of European law at the University of Leiden, and also the writer for the European president of the European Council, and also the author of many books, Pandemonium, The Passage to Europe in 2012, and When Europe Improvises in 2018. And Pierre Vimont, who is a former Secretary General of the European Service of Exterior Action, and a former French ambassador to the United States, and the permanent representative of France at the European Union. And we can see his writings on the website of the Carnegie Endowment think tank. In order to introduce our first topic, identity and European values, I have the pleasure, before I moderate the discussion, I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Van Webke-Kingma to speak about the future of Europe.
Bonjour, my name is Webke Kingma and I am the Special Envoy for the Conference on the Future of Europe at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Netherlands. When Clément Beaune introduced the motto of the French presidency, Relance, Puissance, Appartenance, he said, and I quote, "No political project will last without a collective feeling of belonging to an important project. These are shared values, a culture we have in common, a history that connects us, and plans for the future." So the question today is, do European citizens feel that they belong to an important project? My answer to this question is twofold. It is clear that the European Union has never really won the hearts and minds of its citizens, as was shown by Kiran Klaus Patel in his book Project Europe. It has always been somewhat of a mariage de raison. For example, a recent poll in the Netherlands shows that only 56% of Dutch citizens have a positive image of the EU, and a mere 49% trust the European Union. But the same polls also show that a large majority of Dutch citizens want the EU to act on the global stage. Citizens want the EU to act on topics such as climate change, migration, security and health. Here lies the key to the solution. The pandemic has made clear that Europe has its own interests apart from superpowers like the US and China. But Europe has more than just interests. Luuk van Middelaar writes in his latest book, A European Pandemonium, quote, "Europe has a historic and cultural identity and is perceived as such by the outside world. It is on this basis that we need to define our common goals and interests," unquote. I am convinced that if the EU claims its position on the world stage and acts accordingly and defines its own interests and priorities, this will eventually lead EU citizens to feel part of this unique project. I wish the French presidency every success.
I think that the setting was maybe interrupted, and I would like to bring back this question of articulation between identity and a European project, and also what I find in Webke's speech, which particularly interested me, is this desire which he's expressing on the part of European citizens so that the European Union be a player on the international stage. And he mentioned his expectations vis-a-vis the European Union in the management of COVID, and also this notion of sovereignty, which finally is perfectly meaningful. And I can start the discussion, and maybe I can ask the question to Luuk first. Why, according to you, do you believe that the European Union is confronted with a crisis of identity? You have written a lot about this, but how do you analyze this idea of identity crisis?
Merci,
thank you, Alexandra, for this question, and thank you for this discussion, which delights me. I do not know if we're speaking here about an identity crisis, but it's perfectly fair that the question of identity shows, first and foremost, in the international context above all. And I agree perfectly with the analysis that the ambassador made, that there's a link between this topic of belonging and of power. And I do not know if we should or if we can link it directly to the European Union as such, or as a project that we spoke about with Kigma, with Webke Kigma. I believe that in this notion of belonging, there is the idea of identity, of belonging, of culture, and it's above all, and I think this has also been underlined, it's a subjective question. And we're not going to ask an anthropologist or Japanese anthropologist who, of course, would have no difficulty looking at all of these little peoples at our end of the earth, and he would consider that we Europeans, we share many things in common in the way of behaving, in the way of eating, etc. But this objective aspect it does not interest me. What interests me is, European citizens should feel subjectively that they are European, and they're able to say we the Europeans. That is what's essential. So we could say we, the Europeans, and that this notion of being European is not foreign somewhere or somehow. And here, and that's where the international context comes into play, because we all know by heart everything that divides us, plurality of our histories, of our languages, all that. But it's simply easier to say that we share things when there are other players who are coming onto the stage, especially players who do not wish us good, or who say openly and frankly that they're not like us and they do not want to become like us, like the Chinese, for example, or the Russians. So we're going to leave aside the issue of the Americans, but we'll have the opportunity of getting back to this, of course, afterwards. So we see that in this context, that our political representatives who act, let's say, on the world scene would like to do this on behalf of the Europeans, would like to be able to speak on behalf of the citizens. And that has indeed a clear effect, and that leads to this feeling of belonging. But for the citizens to be able to identify themselves with an action of the European Union as such, we should first that they feel European. They have to feel European. They have to feel that they're part of this set of cultures or this civilizational group. Which is different from, of course, at different degrees from other civilizations. And that it is on this basis that the European Union comes into play in the most accomplished political form that represents this civilization. So when I speak about this, and I will conclude on this, I note almost without having wanted to that I have put identity before sovereignty. But in fact, what you both said, Mr. Ambassador, and you, Alexandra, that it's a circle, it's an interaction between sovereignty and identity. It's the chicken and the egg. Who comes first, the state or the people? And today we could say sovereignty or identity. So, of course, we can discuss this at length. And since the 19th century, we've been speaking about this at length, but I think we can agree that it's in this interaction that we find the solution. And when the European Union shows itself that it's able to act on behalf of the Europeans, on the world scene, this feeling will be stronger or reinforced. That is my first reaction. Thank you very much, Luuk. Caroline de Gruyter, you also have thought a lot about this and written about this issue. So I'd like to hear your opinion about this. Yes, thank you very much, Alexandra. And also, I am delighted to be here with you today, this afternoon. And I also don't believe that there's an identity crisis. I don't see this identity crisis. I think that however, that with all of our differences and all of the discussions between the member states of the European Union on all possible subjects, I believe that over the past years, we note, however, finally, a kind of conscience or a growing conscience with regard to our common identity. I see it in the reactions, for example, to my articles, and the fact that books on Europe become bestsellers. They're Luuk's books, but also mine. And even in the Netherlands, this is somehow evocative. And so you can see that for decades, Europe was rather a market, something, in any case, that was perceived as a technical thing, as a material thing, and not as an identity. And all topics that were really dealing with or that were involving European citizens, such as security, currency, health, remained in a national arena. And those who wanted to insist that Europe was not a political union and that Europe did not touch Europeans, well, the citizens could perfectly do so, and they did it. And these public speech and the public position in the Netherlands is an excellent example. I learned in the school that the European Union is just a market, good for Philips and Unilever. I learned the difference between the European Council and the European Commission only when I came to Brussels 20 years ago. But before, I had no idea of what they are. And we tell us that things haven't really changed in the meantime. But still, something is changing. The member states must work together in a tighter way than before. And many of our challenges that Luuk spoke about are at a national level. It's impossible for a country to solve them on their own, from climate change to the purchase of anti-COVID vaccines or even defense. All this has to be dealt with at an international level. So thus, politics is becoming more European as well. We're creating a political platform that's a bit broader than before. And do people like that? That, in my opinion, depends on how this is going to be achieved. I will never forget an anecdote that was that one day a German European civil servant told me, who was living in Brussels for quite a while. His wife is Italian, and they had two sons. The father, spoke German with his kids, and she, Italian. And each summer they would go holiday, of course, in Italy. And one day, when the boys were still young, an aunt asked to the older one, who was about 8, 10 years old then, do you feel more Italian or do you feel more German? And probably everybody around the table would hear, was expecting a favorable answer for Italy, that he would choose Italian. But no, the little boy said that he felt rather German. And everybody was quiet around the table. And the aunt insisted, why? And he answered, because the Deutschmark is stronger than the lira. That was before the euro, of course. And thus, I believe that the development of European identity depends on the achievement of the common European policies. As long as there are European successes, these citizens can identify themselves with these successes. And I think that we identify with them as a little boy back then. Not people don't identify with failure. It's very important in my eyes. So we're thinking about Erasmus, for example. We're thinking about peace since 1945. We're thinking about the obtention of vaccines. And with them, we can feel European because these are successes. But we also think about foreign policy in which each capital goes in a different direction. And we only apply the basic minimum of consensus, or not even. And there we are a bit ashamed, and we feel maybe a little bit less European. That's what I will stop here. Thank you very much, Caroline. And you're bringing up an extremely interesting notion.
Passer la parole à Pierre Vimont pour recueillir son avis, où vous dites que finalement...
Give the floor to another panelist to give his advice on how the European construction should be based on the good performance of the European Union, to respond to the challenges, the political challenges. Besides the narrative, we should reinvent a story which would help the public opinion to adhere to the European ideals. So the message should not be too convincing, but at the end of the day, as you say, like Caroline has stated, the success, the performance of the European Union is important in which way she will react to the challenges faced, economical challenges, sanitary challenges. And I would like to know your opinion on how do you believe the European Union should respond to the challenges that Europe is facing at this point in time? Mr. Vimont, you have the floor. Thank you. Thank you, Alexandra. Thank you to be moderator in this discussion. Thank you also to the ambassador. Thank your team for having organized this discussion and enabling me to meet Caroline again and Luuk, with who I've always enjoyed exchanging views. So, as an answer to your question, but also to convey my questions, Alexandra, it's true, you are interested in success and victory. So Europe, of course, can be proud when there are successes. In the year 92, when the Maastricht Treaty was signed and the euro was formed, Europe was quite sure of herself and doing well with a lot of sympathizers. And then came a period with difficulties and challenges. And we have faced many challenges: the financial crisis, Brexit, migration crisis, Ukraine. issues, and now the difficult relationships with Russia. This all creates dark clouds above our heads, and that does not make things easier. But I do believe that besides the question of success in politics, a question I've always been interested in is the question, why do you feel more European when you're abroad, whether when traveling and not when you're in Europe? So people who have traveled to the United States, for myself, I feel more European when I am in the United States. So you should understand that identity is a subjective value, and you feel it when you're outside of the place you would like to identify with. So when I am in the United States with a different culture from the European culture, and when I say the European culture, I don't mean French or English or Dutch, but really the European culture, you feel it when you are away. How is this possible, and what is it based upon? So you feel that it's based on many different factors, history, but also values we appreciate, but also governance styles and economy styles. And when you come back to Europe from another place and you take into consideration these different factors, history, social aspects, economy, then you realize that you are divided. Joseph Borrell often cites this example I consider to be important, a comparison between his country, Spain, and Poland. So you know that there are different actors, but in Spain they have been perceived as obstacles or even enemies to get out of the era of Franco, to find liberty again. But in Poland, America and the Catholic states were the defenders of the independence of Poland, the two actors that enabled Poland to free itself from the Russian influence. So you only can add that's a difficult topic. There are obstacles threatening our identity, and they are real. You see it reflected in the values. Now, the difference between Western and Eastern Europe, further than Poland and Hungary, the traditional values called Christian values oppose us maybe, but you also see it reflected in the social structures, the relevance of the state, or the which is stronger in some countries than others. So these are different obstacles you need to overcome in order to find the advantage and appreciate the identity and the European narrative that we actually share. So if you look at a period of 500 years ago, then you say, okay, in Europe, we went from the Middle Ages to the Enlightened period. And then in the 19th century, we went through revolutions, and then we came into the 20th century. So this is how Europe was built, slowly but surely. And if you look on the short term, it's more complicated, and I would like to refer to what Caroline has said about failure or success. And Luuk also mentioned the chicken and the egg problem. Identity is something that's built up gradually based on solidarity, and this might be the thing that is hampering somewhat nowadays. So in the 60s, 70s, 80s, we had a feeling of solidarity, and that was the idea behind Jean Monnet's approach. So a common market, a common money, the euro. and then later on it became more complicated. There can be different explanations, the fact that more countries come to adhere and other difficulties that affect the sovereignty of the countries in a stronger way. So it makes it more difficult to sign agreements. But I should say that tangible solidarities are more difficult to build and entertain. We've seen it recently with the COVID vaccine, and people think it's relatively well done. But remember, at the beginning of the crisis, everyone was criticizing the European institutions. But then in the beginning, you need a common adversarial and the common debts. The American states also built and grouped together because of the common debt. So the progresses we have managed to make happen are because of the recovery plans. So the machine to build solidarity needs to be given a new stimulus. And I am in the group of the people who thinks that everything is interrelated, and an identity is something that you need to build gradually based on solidarity, based on strengthened sovereignty. I will stop there because I've taken too much time. Well, this is perfect transition to talk about the second topic, society. What will society look like after COVID? So yes, this is the question of solidarity. You have indicated it's more and more difficult to create solidarity linkages, and this is good to work at the European level. But the COVID crisis has given European Union a push to think about its identity and try to find a good way of responding to this crisis that has seen no precedent. And so work needs to be done, interventions are required, and we should reconsider the dependencies. We should evaluate the costs of not being sovereign, not being independent, and depend on certain strategic branches, like, for example, the manufacture of masks or vaccines. And then there are economic, political policies, but also the geopolitical relationships. How should we address these questions? So also the issue of China. What impact does a certain economic choice have on the short term, and what will be the effects on the long term? Also the strategic effects. So this also implies a change of rationale for the European Union. Maybe an intellectual boundary should be broken, and then Europe should be considered as a geopolitical entity that should be redefined in a strategic way, but then also an institutional boundary which should be reconsidered. So European Union should see itself as one power and not a compartmentalized entity. Well, all the other powerful countries use it as a weapon to exert pressure on us. So the COVID crisis also forced the European Union to rethink their capacities, think of new tools to create in order to respond adequately to crisis, not only the sanitary crisis, the social crisis, the political crisis, the strategic issues, including defense. So this simultaneousness of these different crises makes it really urgent and necessary to find a good way of responding. The first question I would like to ask all of the panelists: to which degree does the COVID crisis, in your view, strengthen the differences between the different member states of the European Union? Or maybe on the contrary, does it help the European Union to understand that it is capable of facing all these crises together? And I would also like to talk about the public health is not a competency of the European institutions, and the European citizen wanted the European Union to play a clear role in this crisis and in public health. So, first of all, I would like to ask Caroline to take the floor. You have written a lot of texts and articles stating that COVID-19 was a shock for the European identity. In the idea of boundaries, protection, Europe as a fort, and Europe as a stronghold is also used as entity by many European leaders. But the COVID crisis has strengthened this. So, Caroline, your views. Thank you. Well, that's difficult. Draw really conclusions at this stage about the consequences of the pandemic on society and politics. The pandemic is still ongoing, and it's only after more time that we will see what the consequences are. You are right. Europeans are still divided because of COVID, but we also decided to launch two projects, important projects in my view, during the pandemic, European projects, buying the vaccines, I already mentioned it, but also the Euro bonds that failed. This was a subject that could not be talked about openly some years ago, but now suddenly it's a success. And both these projects have strengthened the feeling of solidarity between Europeans, which was under stress after the financial crisis. And secondly, health, as you said, is a national competency. And so how, even if for the first time now we closed the borders collectively at the European level, so there was us and them, the clear divide. But we look at one another in Europe. You always know what do the French do, the Italians, the Greeks, with the corona passes, with the masks that need to be worn. So could you reduce it or strengthen it so you get closer together, and then you take some more distance? And then there's also the anti-vaxxers formed in a large part by skeptical people who simply use this crisis to mobilize themselves and or have European structures. So I've just seen a video of Nigel Farage today, filmed in the cold of Siberia, and the theme was fascinating, but also a bit horrifying. So I believe that quite often crises in Europe, just like the pandemic we are now undergoing, don't really divide us. They also unify us in a certain way. Thank you, Caroline. Luuk, you have the floor. Thank you, Alexandra. I would like to say two more things on top of what Caroline has said. First of all, I would like to understand how was it possible for the European Union to act as quickly, relatively speaking, of course, in the two big topics, the procurement of the vaccines and the politics on debt. This was unimaginable a few years ago, but I'm very happy to see that at the point in time where the pandemic came upon us, the European Union was absent or weak, didn't know what to do. In Brussels, they'd say, okay, we are on the defensive, but this is not a competency of the European Union, public health, so it's a horrible, tragic situation, but Brussels can do nothing about it. And then we saw a phenomenon happening, which was new and different from the previous crises, like the financial crisis, for example. The public opinion, in a certain way, in Italy, Spain, France, and elsewhere, asked a common action. So it's the citizens who asked Europe to come into action, whether other member states or institutions in Brussels, but there was a feeling that a crisis was so huge, with a geopolitical framework which is also quite broad. Europe had to act. And so if it's not working well now, well, it had to change. And so, okay, the representatives decided to go further from the red line and try to create a common response relatively quickly. So we talk about February 2020. The atmosphere was really morose and quite bitter between member states. And now, 5-6 months later, after the Euro crisis, I was assistant to the president of the European Council, and 2 years it took us from one summit to the next, from one crisis to the next. 2 years whether Europe seems to fail, but thanks to a call for help by the population, things changed. So it came bottom up and not top down. Second point, but maybe I should take less time to evoke this, the pandemic shows that Europeans have considered it to clearly stress the isolation. The Europeans saw they were alone and vulnerable, so they hadn't considered that contagious diseases would also be an issue for them. There's something for Africa or other countries, tropical countries, but even the United States. You would go to development countries when you were young, but now help was provided, and now the United States, who always clearly acted in all international crises since the Second World War, was now absent. So you see that our mental map of the world is changed, and you feel alone and isolated. And how could I put this? It's translated in decisions in Brussels, and it's not a coincidence that since then we talk about the strategic autonomy we need. The ambassador also referred to it. It's after the pandemic that these types of notions are being developed and not only considered in terms of military and defense, but also in terms of economy. So the pandemic was an accelerator of a trend that would evolve over long terms, but on many facets, this should not be underestimated. Thank you very much, Pierre. I believe everything has already been said. I couldn't add a lot to this, but to come back to what Caroline and Luc have said, maybe we could think it more through Luc. And Caroline were right. They stressed the two big successes of this pandemic crisis, notably the purchasing of vaccines and the capability of setting up a vaccine policy at the European level, and also the recovery plan, something that we could consider to be a common debt. So it's interesting to see, because it also brings about the question, is Europe capable of acting in a situation which is not a crisis? Jean Monnet often said it, the crisis will build or forge Europe. And if you look at Europe's history, well, it is actually the case. The same applies to the crisis of immigration in 2015. The Europeans didn't know how to act, were a bit overcome by the situation, but then slowly but surely they negotiated an agreement with Turkey to have it act as a transiting country and would collaborate with Europe. And it was signed in 2016. And once it was signed, everyone went their own way. So we understand we have more difficulty to make progress. Donc, we are in difficulty to modernize, reform the processes that are in place, like Schengen and Dublin, etc. So you may wonder, can Europe act outside of a crisis context? So is Europe capable of anticipating and put order in its governance? And the question was addressed by Alexandra. So crises will be multi-dimensional, and different institutions need to be involved and act, and different services need to collaborate. So a new grammar has to be found, if you will, the governance grammar. We need to develop it, and it's still difficult, but not in times of crisis, because everyone agrees to team up and work together. And the institutions of the member states are able to work in partnership and bring their citizens that were abroad, bring them back to the European territories and provide help to the countries in most difficulties in terms of procuring vaccines. So it's quite productive, but we should be able to draw lessons and try to be more proactive at the next crisis we can expect to be coming. But it's also an issue related to the modern political societies. Only when we are right in the crisis are we capable of acting in a determinate way. But then this brings about the question, if we are not capable of anticipating and improving our efficiency, should we address the issues of governance, of subsidiarity, which got lost somewhere on the way, but it will come back. It's an important issue. What should we do with the Brussels institutions? What should remain at the level of the member states? And now, in the middle of the crisis, every time a country wants more controls at the borders, or the other member states say, well, that's not the rule of the game. But then you can wonder if subsidiarity cannot be applied in such a case. Some countries are more vulnerable to contaminations than others. So why should all the 27 member states do exactly the same? And it also brings about the question about actions you may want to deploy in other branches. And then what about law? There are different tribunals and courts. Should we try to build in more flexibility? So all these questions need to be addressed, and we need to find a way to bridge them in times of relative calm and not in times of crisis, because that's not the best context for a constructive strategy. And I believe that that's where Europe should make progress in order to go forward in a harmonious and peaceful way.
Thank you very much. And we have switched to our third topic, which is Europe as a power in the world. And therefore, I'm going to ask a question for the discussion. Is Europe a power in today's world? And for this, we're going to listen to Michel Fouché, who is a geographer and a former French ambassador. And he is working for the Maison de la Fondation des Sciences de l'Homme.
En une minute, je dirais oui, et en 2 minutes, je dirais non. En 1 minute, l'Union a 3 fondamentaux solides. C'est le premier marché solvable du monde, et par conséquent, elle fixe les règles d'accès à ce marché. On parle de puissance normative. Elle est attachée aux droits et aux règles, à la démocratie, à la paix, à la diplomatie, et donc c'est un centre de pouvoir alternatif aux logiques hégémoniques, néo-impériales et révisionnistes des concurrents. C'est un laboratoire de compromis au sens où les différends entre les pays membres sont traités de manière démocratique. Enfin, elle a un réel pouvoir d'attraction sur le continent et sur ses périphéries. En 2 minutes, l'Union n'est pas une puissance. C'est le seul centre de pouvoir qui n'est pas un État, à la différence de tous les autres. Enfin, l'Union reste soumise aux États-Unis, hyperpuissance militaire, pour la sécurité en dernier ressort et la technologie. L'Europe parle l'anglo-américain. L'anglo-américain, c'est la langue du maître, qui est le véhicule d'un encerclement cognitif. Les Européens se veulent toujours amis, alliés, alignés, mais peut-on bâtir une puissance sans émancipation? Alors que faire? L'ambition de souveraineté, mise en avant par Paris, acceptée désormais par Berlin, doit être, à mon sens, complétée de 3 axes d'efforts concrets sans incantation. Les normes, les règles, c'est ce qu'on fait de mieux dans l'Union. Elle existe dans le monde par le marché intérieur et l'euro. Enfin, un réarmement technologique endogène et le refus de l'alignement sur les seuls intérêts américains sont les seules bases disponibles d'une souveraineté effective.
Alors peut-être une réaction.
So maybe a quick reaction before we open the discussion to the different participants. So how do you react to the statements of Michel Fouché? The European Union, as you know, is defining its strategic compass. So that's to say, to try to define a common vision vis-à-vis the major strategic stakes today and the way that the European Union must face them. And there's also the perception today of the European Union as a strategic player. Today, even President Biden and President Putin are meeting to speak finally about issues of European security without the Europeans, even, of course, if there will be a meeting at the NATO that will include the Europeans as well as at the OSCE. But there's also the perception by the other powers who do not see the European Union as a relevant strategic player. So how can the European Union become more credible today in the world? Is it able to become more credible? Does it have to be selective in its commitments? And on which issues Michel Fouché spoke about a relationship with the United States? Do we have to define a form of autonomy of thought, an autonomy in our decision-making process when our visions do not completely agree with the American vision? by giving three, if you can say very quickly, because we have a series of interesting questions that we are expecting. So I'm going to start with you, Mr. Pierre Vimont. Well, very quickly, Alexandra, first of all, with regard to the notion of power and with regard to the perception as you define it, the perception of Europe as a power or non-power also depends on the person we're speaking with. I believe that we all agree to say that Europe is not a military power, and in relation to this world where more and more where the major powers use more and more power, the diplomacy of power, Europe seems to be a bit marginalized and somehow to step out of history. But what has always surprised me, in particular when I was in the United States and when I was speaking to the to the big GAFA, and I was saying that Europe was not much. Well, their answer was to say, "What are you saying? We are every day subjected to the attacks of from Brussels, and we pay fines, so we can say that Europe at the economic level is a true power. And therefore, when we try to invent the word of normative power as a regulatory power, this notion exists. We shouldn't neglect it. These are strong cards that we have, which leads me to the second thought that I'd like to share with you. Europe can be a power under the condition that it has chosen its own power. I would say, as we, its own brand, it should develop its own power brand. So instead of trying to imitate China or Russia or the United States, in my eyes, we will lose this race, or in any case in the media, and that we have to invent our own ability to be a power. And for that, we should really think about what are our interests, with which weapons we want to defend our interests, according to which methods, with which kind of governance, as I was saying to you earlier. And that is the real challenge that is presented to us. And of course, on that basis, if we're able to do so, we will see that we have much more weight in the world than we have now. And last point, and I will not dwell upon this, is of course our ability to be united. But for this, we have to be able to listen to each other, because between East and West, North and South, we do not have the same interests, the same geopolitical interests, and this is totally understandable. We do not have the same geography. We do not live in the same regions, and the Russian threat for Poland and Lithuania is much more present than for Spain, Italy, or France. So we have to be aware of that, and we have to listen to the others. So on that basis, we can try to define a common position to move ahead. I will stop here. Thank you, Alexandra. Luuk. Thank you, Alexandra. As Pierre was saying earlier, everything was said. So I fully support what Pierre has just said. Maybe I would just add two small little points. I agree entirely with what Pierre is saying with regard to the European brand in the field of power. But he says it as a French person, coming from a tradition that has always thought about this issue. And as a great diplomat, therefore, he is opening up to his other partners. But I would say, as a Dutch person living in Brussels, but still, we have to insist on the need to inject the language of power in the habits in the Brussels doctrine, because Brussels, in this movement, which you called, Alexandra, at the geopoliticization, thank you for this wording, Brussels is coming from very far, because the doctrine in the city of Brussels was invented to deny or overcome, or however you want to call it, anything that deals with power, territory, borders, history, or even identity and culture. So reappropriating at least a little bit of all of this without falling into excess that we witness every day through other players is very important, because otherwise we will remain on the wrong side of this balance. So this is my first little nuance. And second point, to answer Michel Fouché, who raises, as Pierre did it too, our relationship with the United States, which is fundamental, of course, which divides us too, maybe more than our relationship, paradoxically speaking, with China or Russia. Well, at least we can all agree that we have to be careful about Russia and China, but the relationship with the United States is very touchy. And here, Michel Fouché used a word that was very powerful, because he didn't speak about, he spoke about strategic dependency, NATO, we all know this, but there is also what he calls almost an intellectual dependency. I noted this. He speaks about cognitive encirclement. That's a nice word, a nice expression, but maybe a bit too powerful. But to turn this in a positive light, I think that what he means is that it's important that we as Europeans, we think among ourselves about our interests, about our strategic interests and others in the world. And even if we're going to join, in many cases, our American friends with regard to the final words, it's important that we think about all of this together among ourselves. So I really wish a lot of success to the French presidency with the discussions on the strategic compass that you were talking about. Thank you very much, Caroline. You have written a lot about strategic autonomy by saying, let's stop speaking about strategic autonomy as a vague concept and let's practice it, concretely speaking. So maybe could you also, in relation to our discussion, and then we will come to a part that's a bit more concrete and with recommendations and all that. What is your vision of this issue? And then we will move on to the discussion. Yes. I believe that Europe is not really a wall as a powerful Europe. But I agree with Pierre and Luuk that we learn because we have to learn. And as Pierre said, Europe is a reactive organization in this idea, not proactive. Where if we ask an Estonian what are our major challenges, and his answer is going to be different from the answer of a Portuguese person or of an Irish person. So all capitals are preparing themselves to face the challenges of the future, but our challenges are different. So each one, if you want, is anticipating another crisis and is preparing him or herself for this. And unfortunately, each time the crisis has to hit us, especially in this field, because we do not have any landmarks. It's purely intergovernmental. And so first the crisis, and then we act. Because we cannot do anything else by default. And that's always what happens. So that is the momentum of Europe that is managed by the member states with different points of view. And it's very, very difficult. We have to be realistic. It's difficult to change that. But what really helps, of course, is that France, with its mission, with its internationalist mission, likes to think about the European future in France's interest, of course, too. And we and is also often preparing us for great concepts of the world, such as strategic autonomy or this famous compass. And first of all, most countries ignore or reject these concepts. What are they thinking about now, the French? That's what they're saying to themselves. Also in The Hague, we do not really like that often. And, well, But what fascinates me is by rejecting or by criticizing these concepts as the strategic autonomy or the compass, we therefore manage in a funny way to create a debate. The Dutch have prepared a long paper with the Spaniards on that subject. So that way, the topic itself, the project itself, well, here, the words are there, and the idea is there, and then comes a crisis, and great, okay, once again, at least something is happening that we can speak about. It takes time, but I think that it is very difficult to change that. But we are managing to do so faster than earlier. I will stop here. Thank you, Caroline.
So, I would like to give the floor to Didier Herbert, head of the representatives of the European Commission in the Netherlands. So, do ask your question live. Please switch on your video. We can hear you. We can hear you. Do you see me? We can't see you, but we can hear you, which is most important. Okay, thank you. First of all, a big thank you to have organized this, and Pierre Vimont and Caroline de Gruyter et Luuk van Middelaar, since they give us interesting teachings, and my contribution will be meager in comparison. But with my experience in Brussels, I have learned one thing: asking questions to my colleagues with mixed families, multilingual households. When I ask them what their real identity is, which is the language they dream in at night, often the answer I'm provided with, it's not a question of identity, but we do it this way. This is what binds us, regardless of the diversity. So, at the European Union, we could have a similar response. Yes, we have huge diversity.
Tient compte des valeurs, l'approche humaine.
That is especially our wealth, but we like to have a common approach, open to certain shared values. And as Pierre Vimont and Caroline de Gruyter have indicated, we have soft power, and we should understand how important it is. You only understand it when you're outside of the European boundaries. And then when you come back in Brussels, you forget it again and you are faced with other issues. So the question I'd like to ask is, how can you make sure the method is adapted? It has advantages, it has drawbacks, but the merit is it has functioned for 70 years and it has formed the European Union since 1950. So how can we build it further without losing all the advantages it has brought us until now? That's it. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you. I would like to take a second question, which is linked to the question of Mr. Herbert, and drawing on the issue of sovereignty and identity. So what are the questions you have related to the issues in Poland and Hungary? Why does it take so much time to consider their adherence to the family? So pick and choose. I'll give Caroline the floor first. Ooh, I was still taking notes. Well, how can we adapt? That's the huge challenge we are faced with, because Europe was made to depoliticize issues. There were too many walls, for example, and so we became the world pacifists. And as soon as there's a political problem, we try to break it up in small bits and then try to solve the bits. That's the European approach. But now we need to make it political again. And that's difficult because it goes against, how could I say it? It goes against the removal of the political issues that was the raison d'être at the start. So now we can't just sit and wait. We have to address the challenges and we need to act. But that's exactly the big challenge. And secondly, I really appreciated the question submitted to us by Didier Herbert. The definition of the European family, the European identity. One day you are A, the next day you are B, so you play with it a bit. You have multiple identities. And yes, I know it. I recognize it from my own family because we are European, if you will. And it also reminds me of the European school in Brussels. Another small child, a German national, went to take a course in history, but in French. And there he heard facts about a war he'd never heard about when he was at home, and vice versa. French nationals had history lessons in German. And all these boys told me later, of course, that for them, European identity means that you feel always that you're a minority. You are aware of the fact that there are always people that have a different way of thinking. And that,
tout le monde pense comme toi.
You don't think everyone has the same way of thinking as you do. You know there will always be other people with different opinions. That's also the European identity. I'll stop there. Thank you very much, Caroline. Pierre, could you give your response to both questions? Well, I'd like to come back to what Caroline has said and build on it. Nowadays, Europe is asked to be more a political entity, while she was not built for politics. So I remember of an article I read from Luuk in the newspaper Le Monde, where he stated that the European Council became the place where this political debate could take place. And I believe that this is a period which we are faced with, a period where the institutions, the European Council more than others, but also the European Commission. Remember, Jean-Claude Juncker, when he came to head the European Commission, he said he had one big ambition, and that was to make the European Commission a political entity, and then the European Parliament stating that was not the raison d'être. Well, this is changing. It's progressing, which is a good thing. But these forces should not be canalized, if you will, but should be structured to become more efficient and effective. That may be the problem that Europe suffers from now, more than wondering whether you should continue as before. It's always yes and no. Yes, of course, you could go forward with tangible steps, as we saw in the crisis, be practical, but also the political dimension might be something we stated when we talked about the language of power. I agree that the language of power is to believe yourself to be a political actor in the international arena. You should dare say what you think. And maybe we should be the defense of the universal idea of peace. So it seems to be marginalized now if you compare it with the things we have to deal with. So maybe Europe is removed from history. So in order to make sure Europe stays in history, she should be an important actor in the international arena. So all the institutions need to adapt to that situation. Thank you very much. Luuk, you have the floor. And draw some conclusions. Well, thank you, Alexandra. I would like to say something about Poland and Hungary. Another question which was posed. Two items, but they are related to the topic of identity and sovereignty. So first point, I believe this applies to most of us. Of course, I'm worried about the authority excesses in Warsaw and in Hungary. But most of the European institutions should try and put pressure, moral pressure, financial pressure in order to change the situation. But as you said, at the end of the day, the change can only be brought about from within those countries and from the citizens that can vote at the elections, and they will express themselves at the same time as the French will express their votes, like the Polish citizens. They will indicate whether yes or no they want to change the way they're heading. So that's occurring in Europe. We can wish, we can light candles, you can do everything you want, but that's the situation. Second point, very quickly now, what we feel or perceive, why is it such a painful question? Well, you could say, yes, we will simply throw out the dissident country from the European Union. Sorry for not using more diplomatic terms, but that's because in the term Europe, we see what we want to be representative, so moral values and the rule of law, but Europe is also the idea of the continent, a continental unity. So Europe, the political project, is a project of values, but also of a certain territory. And in the current conflict opposing Poland and the institutions in Brussels put stress on this relationship and notion of Europe, because there's no longer a clear coherence between the territorial entity and the other aspect. So this is very painful, and we can only overcome it with time. So we should hope that things will improve, and we need to be patient and maybe strategic patience, but it says something about our identity and the strong connotation of what it means, Europe. Well, I will give the floor to Louis Vassy, Ambassador of France in The Hague. Thank you very much. I won't take too much of your time. Everything has already been said in a very intelligent way, more than I could do it. But what we see from ourselves is European connection, and what is the mirror that our external neighbors show us reflected. So I will think of my personal experience. When I came to the Netherlands, everybody told me, you will notice how different we are. And now I'm going to be frank. Maybe I have also had the same experience as Pierre Vimont living in the States, but I've never seen such huge differences between the different European countries. Of course, Caroline describes it really well in her book. It's different to live in Vienna or in Brussels, but at the same time, if you take some time abroad to look back, like for example the States, but maybe stronger if you go to another region further away, you see more things that link us together. So external, internal aspects come into place. So the strategic independence or autonomy, that's something I was asked not to use such a term. They said, do not say strategic autonomy. Now I understand why it's difficult to accept such a term. Well, even though the Dutchman doesn't want to be autonomous, but the notion of autonomy seems to refer to something which is hostile towards allies. But in France, we don't consider it at all in such a way. You want to master your destiny. It's much better than not mastering your destiny. So you want to be autonomous. So it goes without saying. So if you look at identity, when you look at each other, you notice the differences. But when you look at the term of sovereignty, it's different when you reflect on it within the group or when you reflect on it from the outside of the group. So both topics. As Pierre has said, everything is interrelated, and the question of identity, is it sovereignty or vice versa? And common experiences like crises make a common identity. They are shared experiences. It's the experience we live in today. And this clearly illustrates it. We started with a crisis and all the borders closed, all the inter-European borders closed. You couldn't go from the Netherlands through Belgium to France anymore. It became really difficult, but we overcame this in a few months by harmonizing our approaches. So, with common experience, shared experience, you have boundaries which bind us. So, what I hear from this panel is that there is still hope. So yes, foreign borders may be nice, but we need to accelerate the process of sharing sovereignty, but also combining our political experiences and find a stronger identity now. A note I would like to end my conclusion with, as a Frenchman, European sovereignty as an extra factor to the sovereignty enables you to express yourself on difficult issues, but are difficult to manage on a national level. But the European identity, the values, humanism, democracy, cooperation, dialogue, openness, this is the European identity becomes added to the national identities, and it makes us more diverse, richer. So you would be more sovereign and closer together. So thanks to each and everyone, and I wish for the further period of the French presidency of the institution. I hope that we will be able to see each other in the physical world, but thank you for participating in this conference remotely. Thank you very much. Have a good evening. Goodbye. Thank you. It was a pleasure. Have a nice evening.